Have you ever given any credibility to the unexplained, the mysterious, the sometimes downright weird and creepy?
Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, werewolves, and other animal hybrids, giants, aliens, and things that go bump in the night.
Things that have fascinated and terrified people for generations.
Could they be interdimensional creatures or scientific experiments gone wrong? Do we have any proof that any of these things exist?
Are they folklore, legend, conspiracy theory, or some kind of big government cover-up?
Well, today we're going to skirt around the veil that separates the known from the unknown. So join us as we start this exciting series. You're not going to want to miss any of these episodes. Welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit.
We're your hosts. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
You know, I'm so excited to be diving into this topic. I imagine many of our listeners have heard or maybe even listened to Blurry Creature podcast. Now, they dive into more of the sensational topics, but their company has exploded since launching in just 2020. We're talking 4 years.
Right.
What has turned them into an overnight sensation?
That's a good question. It's the unexplained, the paranormal, things that are not always tangible. People seem to have this sort of unquenchable hunger for things that cannot be explained. The scary, the creepy, the could it be possible?
As a whole, I think our brains are just wired to want to know. I mean, we're materialistic at nature. Mm-hmm. That is which we can see and we can touch and smell and experience. So when we run into things that leave us with no tangible explanation, it drives us literally crazy and sets us on a quest to just figure it out.
It's true. When we started our ministry, our goal was to take that which was explained and that which cannot be and examine it through a biblical perspective.
Does the Bible give us any guidance or answers to Bigfoot, ghosts, demons, aliens, and unexplained creatures?
We're going to spend this next series diving into these topics and much, much more. So stay tuned.
So when was the first time that you heard of Bigfoot?
Well, probably watching Harry and the Hendersons growing up. That's kind of a similar... Which I liked that movie.
Yeah, I remember seeing Harry and the Hendersons, but I knew about Bigfoot long before, of course. I'm just a little bit older than you.
Just barely.
But yeah, Bigfoot was kind of the big craze again in the 80s. It kind of cycles through. And in fact, we even have a Bigfoot museum right here in Nebraska. Who would think? Clear out in the western part, Bridgeport, I think, or kind of around in that area. I did not stop, but I've always been curious.
I kind of want to. We'll have to put that on our list.
A Nebraska woman has a museum dedicated to Bigfoot research and calls herself the Bigfoot Lady.
This is an interesting story. Harriet McFeely takes people through the 3 buildings that make up her museum. The Bone Room features casts of footprints and replicas of ancient skulls. And McFeely also claims that Bigfoot likes to braid horsetails.
I like to show them our Nebraska map, because all of these red pins are sightings of Bigfoot, and a lot of them, you can see, a lot of them are around here.
Well, McFeely also has a book about all the strange things Bigfoot does. She's got a room featuring the famous Bigfoot named Patty. Patty was caught on film in the 60s and is the universal symbol for Sasquatch. There's a Bigfoot conference in Nebraska coming up this spring. So here's the thing. I thought there was just like one Bigfoot, but apparently she believes there are a lot. Male, female Bigfoots.
Right. Did not know.
Didn't know. The more you know.
So why do you think this creature is so popular? I mean, especially if we're not so sure he even exists.
Well, I would imagine part of it is just that he's been seen in so many places. And, I mean, that gives some credence or some, like, people... It's not like one person saw him one time and then it died out. Like, people continue to have sightings, and so then that curiosity continues to grow and it feeds that sort of hunger.
And yet, though, I mean, they say we have no evidence, but there have been footprints. There's even been some pictures.
Not great pictures.
They're always
blurry.
Yeah. Well, they're always legends, but most of them fade away if it's
False.
There is folklore, but most of it is known to be
Folklore.
And then there's stories and lives that have been changed in ways that could never happen unless something of a colossal magnitude had happened.
Absolutely. So how do we filter those stories of other encounters that left people changed forever? It's a lot harder to look at that as a hoax or chalk it up to folklore or legend when something that dramatic has taken place.
So let's start with Bigfoot. For some of our listeners that don't really know the background of this elusive creature, we thought we would just give you just a little tiny synopsis.
Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch, all names for a man-ape creature, 8 to 15 feet tall, usually very hairy.
Sometimes red hair.
Yes. They have been spotted as like single creatures or multiple creatures for centuries. And sightings have been seen in the tallest peaks to the remote corners of the Himalayas.
Even up here in America, we see them in the northwestern part of the United States, especially up around by Mount St. Helens, Montana. Well, there is a guy, so if you have ever listened to Blurry Creatures, that's kind of how they got their start, was really with the Bigfoot. And we know that there are so many people that are interested in that because that's really what exploded their podcast. Well, they just had on, not too terribly long ago, a couple months ago probably, author, adventurer Graham Holyland, which is kind of funny that that's his last name. But he studied and he's excavated and he spent most of his life work in search for firsthand evidence of this elusive creature that has both mesmerized and terrified those who've had an up-close and personal encounter of the third kind.
So the legends of Bigfoot go way back beyond recorded history, and they cover the world. So like you said, in North America, particularly in the Northwest, you can hear tales of 7-foot tall, hairy men stalking the woods, occasionally scaring campers, lumberjacks, hikers, and the like.
Well, Bigfoot is known by many titles with many different cultures, although the name Bigfoot is generally attributed to the mountains of the western region of North America. And there's a lot of names for a lot of countries that I can't pronounce. Which is interesting though. Why is this creature in so many places around the world, and yet nobody has caught one? Nobody can kill one. Nobody, I mean, they've gotten some on tape, some on camera.
But it's usually not great quality.
Yeah, and
But
they
yet-
have seen footprints,
Footprints.
yes. Of course, then this is where you get into the folklore, that they possess special powers and characteristics, and, well, I suppose just because they've been so elusive for so long.
But the very fact that it's been all around the world in different centuries and different civilizations, something similar looking with similar, I mean, there has to be something to that.
Exactly. And
Well, and it's interesting, the Ojibwe of the Northern Plains believe that the Rougarou, I might not be saying that right, but that's what we're going with, appeared in times of danger, and other nations agreed that that hairy apparition was kind of a messenger of warning, telling man to change his ways.
And that is really interesting when you think about it. I mean, why would that be part of the legend? I mean, if it was a bear or something like that.
Right.
And I've heard from people who've had bear encounters, and I mean, and they rip their prey limb to limb. And while it is scary, but it's a bear.
Right.
This thing, when people have seen it, it changes them in ways
That a bear wouldn't.
Yes, that it's
Yeah.
not something that has been of this physical world that we know. The North American settlers started reporting sightings during the late 1800s. So that's why this is not new. This is not something that Hollywood created
No.
in 1950 or whatever and tried to scare the population.
Right.
And in the 1990s, with the occasional finding of footprints, sporadic encounters, with even a few grainy photos and videos added to the mystery.
Those who claim to have seen Bigfoot have described everything from a large, upright ape to an actual hairy human, sometimes standing over 8 feet tall, and usually described as fairly powerfully built. They're strong. So debate and research continues.
You know, and I think it's interesting. A lot of this is set around that 8 foot, but some of the stuff that I have dug into, so they were like 15 feet. That's like twice the size.
Yeah.
But I gotta say here, however, in one real sense, Bigfoot does exist because the Western Air Defense Sector, Washington Air National Guard, adopted the mascot of Bigfoot and operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, monitoring the skies of nearly 73% of the United States and Canada. Just like the Bigfoot legend, the sector is rarely seen and rarely heard, but rest assured it continues to observe and, if necessary, serve as a messenger of warning. I thought that was kind of fun.
It is fun.
So now this was something from, I thought this was interesting. This was a newspaper article, and it's from the Reflector. The news, and this is what they say at the top. They're the newspaper with integrity since 1909. And it published the 100-year anniversary of the coal miners' encounter at Ape Canyon, Sasquatch. The attack that had happened there. That's what that last one of Blurry Creatures that I had listened to with Mr. Holyland. He has dug into this, made it kind of his life's work in a sense. And he is now coming out with a 200-page book on all the findings, and he even met with family members of the 5 coal miners that were up at Ape Canyon, and they happened in 1924. Well, we have a picture up here to show you. According to Mark Murcell, who provided this photo and description, miners Leroy Perry Smith, that's one, and Fred Beck stand outside of the cabin where the alleged attack took place. This is the interesting thing of this cabin, because what happened, the coal miners were up there and they had, this is by Mount St. Helen, but it's on the one side where the eruption didn't bother it. It was far enough over. And actually you can't even see the hole to the mine. It's there, but it's pretty disguised. In fact, when Mr. Holyland was up there, he said he was within 50 feet of it and he didn't even know it.
Oh, wow.
The family members, when he started investigating and talking to the daughter, Betty, her grandsons, I think, went out and they actually found the mine and went down in it, but a lot of it is covered up. But the point was, this was a gold mine. So when these 5 miners went up there, say the coal miners, but they had built this cabin. And it's
Just
a good-sized cabin. You look at it, and that chink is what they put in between the logs, and I mean, it's a pretty big area. Well, one particular night, now they had been mining up there for quite a while, and they were actually getting gold. They found a satchel in one of the gentlemen's, I think it was Betty's mom, sorry, I think it was Betty's dad, or maybe it was the youngest one. The youngest brother was like 18 at the time when this happened. And nobody talked about anything. In fact, when he was interviewing Betty, she didn't even realize that her dad was the one that was part of this, had no clue.
Oh my
until
goodness.
he started telling her everything. So they found a little bag that had gold nuggets in it.
So they wouldn't have wanted to draw attention to that location.
No, they wanted to keep that quiet, which one could say, well, maybe that was it, but why would you then draw attention? They said that this one particular night while they were in there, it was like 7 or 8, not one that you've heard in all these other reported things, came up on them. They could see outside the window, and they were throwing and hurling big rocks, boulders at this cabin. They were up on the roof, they were on the sides, and in fact the hole that's on the side in this picture was from the Sasquatch, supposedly. Now if it was Bear, I think it was Leroy Perry that fired 11 shots at this one
Particular creature
and didn't kill it. He kept thinking that maybe he killed it. I mean, he didn't kill it at the time, but he thought, well, surely it went off, and that's why they call it Ape Canyon, that it fell off the gorge and landed down there. So the men were just, I mean, beyond terrified and petrified all night, because guns weren't working, nothing was working. They were using fire to try to get it. Well, morning comes and they get out of there as quick as they can, and they see the footprints everywhere and just the rocks that were the damage it did to the cabin. But there was no sign of this Bigfoot. So they go and they get down to the bottom of the mountain where this ranger is, And they start telling him about it. And the next day he said he had never seen a group of men so terrified in his entire life.
Wow.
So that tells you something. If they were trying to do a hoax, you can't fake.
You can't fake terror like that.
No, you can't. And they couldn't even hardly talk. I mean, they were that
Scared.
And so they ended up going back up to the mountain, and because I think it was Leroy, said, he's got to be dead. I shot him 11 times. He's got to be dead. And they looked over and they went down to nowhere. There was absolutely not a trace of evidence everywhere. Well, here's the thing. Those guys left that mine, didn't board it up, didn't go back. It was an active gold mine. Now, one could say, well, because I thought of that, maybe because it was a gold mine, maybe somebody was trying to fake it, trying to scare them off. So nobody's ever been back to that mine since to do anything.
Wow.
And it's really hard to find or to get to because nobody goes up there. It's not a road. It's not it's quite difficult
To get to.
I think he said when he was trying to tell the grandson how to get there, well, you go until you hit this tree, and then there's a rock, and then you take a left, and then it's all to another tree and another rock.
Seems like a great way to give instructions.
Yeah. But that's kind of the things that have happened.
Yeah, and there's lots of other stories around the world. There was one in Russia that was in particular fairly gruesome. Some students that were attacked by some kind of Bigfoot-like creature.
And I think that's where they call it the abominable snowman, is when you get up into the northern Himalayas and Russia, you get up into those colder regions. Now, for most of you, you may go, the abominable snowman, I saw him on Rudolph, the Christmas show. Yeah. I think he needed the elf that was the dentist to pull a tooth or something. It's been a long time since I've seen that.
That was what he was just grumpy because he had a toothache.
Yeah, that's not really the abominable snowman.
No,
Which is interesting that it's given another name, but it's also called a Sasquatch.
Mm-hmm.
Or a Yeti.
Or Yeti, yeah.
Well, I guess just kind of going back to that one instance, because that's the one that we have kind of the most recorded down. Leroy Smith was quoted as saying he didn't want to have anything to do with what he had shot at again. I mean, he was done. He said he never wanted to talk about it again, and he was very spooked. You know, that's the point. Even his own family, if they were really trying to fake this, their whole family didn't know anything about it.
Right.
I mean, they had just I don't know so much that they swore in secrecy. They just
didn't talk about it.
And I know that it really, really affected the youngest one, who at the time was 18, and it messed him up pretty good from the sounds of it. I can't imagine the nightmares that he probably had afterwards.
Oh, sure.
So Bigfoot, is he real? Is he legend? Is he myth? Is he interdimensional? How do they show up and how do they just disappear?
And why can't we get good photography or videography of it?
And how can something that big just not leave any evidence? The terror part reminds me more of demons, the demoniac people who have come away from ghosts, demons, stuff like that.
Encounter.
It's that kind of terror that is not like anything that's
earthly.
Well, let's take this a step further.
Okay.
So, we don't have enough to talk a whole episode on Bigfoot, but we wanted to start there because what other creature reminds you a lot of a possible Bigfoot?
Giant, perhaps?
You know, there have been many stories of when this was recent, when we were in the Afghan war, that soldiers, and it was really on the hush-hush and some of it's leaked out, but soldiers had run across these giants with the big long red hair, 13 feet tall or more, inside these caves.
Well, one of the stories that came from that was the giant of Kandahar, who was reportedly a 13-foot tall monster. He had red hair and 6 fingers, which is an important note. And he lived in the mountains of Afghanistan, and supposedly he was killed and covered up by the government.
You know, in that area that's by Iraq and Iran and most of that stuff all happened Israel, you know, in that area.
Yes. Wouldn't have been too far from the Valley of the Shadow of Death.
No, not too terribly far. You know what? This particular story, why it is so interesting, there was a YouTube clip on it, and it's since been deleted. Witnesses claim that they saw the horrifying incident. I actually watched a whole video on this, and this was quite a few years ago. I mean, after it had kind of just, it wasn't right after it happened, but when things finally surfaced out and leaked out, and they had soldiers drawing what this thing looked like. It tore our soldiers apart limb from limb. It had killed other people. There were bones all over the place. Now we know, what does the Bible say about the giants?
That they're the Nephilim, that they're the half-breed
Disembodied spirits of the,
Yeah, so the fallen angels took wives, and these giants were born, and then they're wandering the earth still. They don't get to go to hell. Well, they can't go to hell, they can't go to heaven, they're just kind of stuck.
And these things are, I mean, it even talks about in the Bible that they were cannibals. They were consuming everything.
Right. It talks about that before the flood.
The soldiers that witnessed this, I mean, you talk about terror and PTSD beyond imagined. They drew pictures of what this thing looked like. They drew pictures of it. They brought it back in a plane, had it strapped down. They kind of drew, I mean, or had an artist draw the rendition. And there was about 4 or 5 soldiers, and they all collaborated. I mean, it was basically looked the same. Everything was done the same.
Right.
But they were just traumatized beyond, and not just even what they had seen, but what they went. I mean, these were their friends that were
Torn apart.
You know,
right.
and I think about this, and I think about the families of those soldiers, and you know that nothing was told to them. Probably friendly fire is what they said. They were just killed in combat.
Right.
Well, there was a chat with L.A. Marzulli. The military contractor claimed to have been there during the savage killing of a killer that he dubbed the Kandahar Giant. So we know L.A. Marzulli. We've gotten to see him a couple different times, and he has been on top of all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And aliens and sleep paralysis and anything that goes bump in the night kind of thing. And from a biblical perspective, how can we find this? Does the Bible talk about it? Is it dimensional or interdimensional? But right there, when they said that it had 6 fingers and toes,
that right in and of itself is biblical. Because that's what it says in the Bible. The giants had, that was one way to distinguish that they were not human and they were not good.
So the military contractor said before he and the other special forces put it down, Mr. K claimed he observed the monster holding a spear and slaying U.S. soldier named Dan. So we're not talking an ape here.
No.
I mean, as far as they don't hold spears, they don't have opposable thumbs,
Right.
they can't do the things that humans can do.
Right. And there have been numerous pictures of giants and skeletons of giants that have been found all around the world. And in particular, anything that's found in the United States, it has disappeared.
Well, in a lot of other places in the world too. Just gone. People have pictures of it and they're standing next to stuff or they find it, and I mean, and these pictures have been around forever, and they've had the skeletons. In fact, they've interviewed the people who have kept the skeletons. Some who have hidden it have leached out, but the minute the government finds out about it, the Smithsonian's got it. Gone. Just doesn't even exist. We're talking not just giants of 13 to 18 feet.
No.
Some of 25 feet, upwards of 40 and 50 feet.
That is just terrifying.
Now, one could say, well, that's just legend, except Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 actually tells us about this.
Oh, it does. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown.
You know, and we know that that's anybody who's followed this and done the research. That is why God really caused the flood,
Right.
because they were messing up the DNA. Where does all this lead back to? This entire series, I guess we could name it the DNA factor.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that.
I like that. That's good.
Because it's really what it is all about. Because in the beginning, before us, there was the fallen realm.
Right.
And when they fell, God then created the earth, and he created man in what? He said, let us make man in
our image.
our image. That's what it's all about. And the fallen realm wanted nothing more than to destroy that. They were so mad. And that's really where this whole thing comes about. They get them kicked out of the garden. They get one to kill off the other. Why? So that way they couldn't procreate.
Mm-hmm.
So that way the image of God could not carry on, yet God makes a
Continues
way.
to make a way.
And then, so then they decide, okay, you know what? Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, that is not even possible because angels can't procreate. Nowhere in the Bible does it say they can't.
Right.
The only mention of it is when they're worried about who's going to be, you know, married to who up in heaven. And they say, no, you're going to be more like the angels. I mean, you don't need to marry.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be the way it is up there.
Right. But that doesn't mean that that's not possible.
Exactly. Which would then bring in all the mythology, is it really mythology or not, from the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians, and everybody has all these stories of these giants from creation. And that was a point. They wanted to corrupt the DNA of human genetics. So that way we were no longer in the image of God.
And then it continues with the seed war, knowing that the lineage of the Savior was going to come from humanity. Well, if they corrupted that, then Jesus couldn't come as our Savior. So it's been a battle from the beginning.
So hence why Noah and his group made it on the ark. It wasn't that they were the only ones, it says righteous, but really in all honesty what it was, he was the only one that was perfect.
Pure.
When you say righteous, the way it was, if you think of a sacrifice, pure, blameless, he was the
Clean.
only one clean DNA. Now we know that he and his son and his wife probably were, but they took wives for themselves,
Right.
and obviously one of the wives was not.
Right.
Because when they get off the boat, that's why they say, and there were those who came after. How could it happen? That's how it happened.
From Ham.
And we know that there was also tablets that were left by the fallen angels that went even after the boat stopped and the waters had receded. The Ham went over and they kind of showed him where it's at. And that's what started a lot of this forbidden knowledge that we were not supposed to have. So we're just going to keep pulling on this thread because the whole point has been to create things. I mean, the fallen realm was creating things that they never should have before the flood.
Right.
I mean, these chimeras, and we talk about half man, half horse, half man, half goat, Pan, you know, all these things that people worshipped.
Half man, half bird, or half lion, half bird. I mean, all
Look
different
at all
kinds
the
of things.
Egyptian.
Oh, so many different combinations of animals.
They were messing with things that they were never supposed to mess with.
Well, and some of them looked a little bit like some of the angels. So,
yeah, if you look at the stone tablets that have been unearthed and the hieroglyphics and then we're going to get into this a little more later, but the stuff that is just now being excavated that show they're aliens that are on these talismans, these tablets, these like little pyramids that you put them up.
Thousands of years old.
Oh, way back. We're talking 5,000-6,000 years old.
Right.
The Anunnaki, and actually, the Bible has some stuff to say about the Anunnaki, which is that fallen realm. So, how are these all linked together?
It's a good question.
Okay, I want to do a bridge a little bit there.
Before we talk about werewolves?
Yeah.
Okay.
we're going to get into the alien stuff later, but what I would argue is that following that seed war, following the DNA, the corrupting the DNA, what do you hear about aliens mostly? It's always abductions. Mm-hmm. It's always tampering with something. It's taking either the sperm or the egg or producing a baby or taking the baby or something like that. Why would they do that?
Right. They have, if they're like these super intelligent creatures, why do they need our offspring?
Yes.
Didn't pop or anything.
And we're going to look into that more and dive in a lot more in future episodes. But today we just kind of want to skirt around the fringes of these, because the other thing that the aliens have in common with Sasquatch and with all these other things we're looking at is terror. Mm-hmm. Sheer terror of a level and a magnitude that is not from this world.
No. Yeah. You can't, often the people can't describe it even. Like there aren't words for it.
Or they will say
that they couldn't even
it's speak. Demonic.
Oh, for sure. And that was used to describe a lot of the things that people saw in those caves in Afghanistan. We've talked about, obviously, with the giants, if they're half fallen angel and half human, that is demonic. So there's much to be said for a demonic presence in all of this, and that is continuing to be part of that thread that we'll continue to pull.
Well, and from him, as it goes down to Cush and Canaan and all that, you get Nimrod. Mm-hmm. And it says that Nimrod became. So that means he was trying to actively become half man, half angel. And what was he trying to do? The Tower of Babel, it was not just a tower, but it was a portal to get back to God. And I'm really excited about that. We are going to get into Stargates. We're going to get into portals. The amount of them that are around the world and the stuff that goes back thousands and thousands of years ago.
Right.
It is just, it's unnerving when you see it, because you're like, this has existed the whole time and we have been completely
in the dark. Completely in the dark. Well, and this is an interesting fact, and we can insert this back in. In talking about giants, if people wanted to say that it's not biblical, the term giants and things that are other words that are used to describe that are actually in the Bible more than Mary, the mother of Jesus.
That is really interesting.
That tells you something.
That it's important.
It is. If there's anything strange and it's in the Bible that made it in there, then it's important. If it's in there that much, there is something to it.
Well, okay, so we know about David and we know about Goliath. A lot of people don't realize that Goliath had brothers that then also the Israelites took care of. Mm-hmm. But you got to go before David. Because when God brought Moses and the Israelites up out of Egypt, he was going to give them the promised land right away.
Right.
But when they went and first tried to go in, what did they see?
Giants. And they said, we are but grasshoppers.
And here they had trusted God to get them past Pharaoh, to get them through all the plagues, to get them through the sea, parted the sea. And they get up there and they go, nope, that's too big for him. We're not going to trust God. And so because of that is what caused the wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And when they get done and they're ready to go back into the promised land, and Moses has stayed up on Mount Nebo, and Joshua now is the one that's in charge, when they come in, what do they see when they sent spies in?
Giants. And that's where that phrase comes from. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Because Joshua draws a line in the sand and says, look, I'm trusting God in this one.
You're either with me or without me. With me or without me. So we know they're there. And there was five brothers, the giants, that the Bible names that they had to go in and take out. Mm-hmm. And King Og of Bashan.
Right. He was one of the big ones.
Yeah. In fact, when we were at Gilgal Rephaim,
there's speculation that Gilgal Rephaim, the the size of it, which is
The center of it.
right, the wheel of the giants, matches what we have for the size of the Og of Bashan, and the thought is that he is who is buried under there, at least, or that it was
they
made
had put
for
him in there. The whole thing was resurrecting.
Right.
And so, and they also believe that the way that is all made out, and the ley lines and everything that it lines up with, and the star patterns and Orion, it's built that it would resurrect him, and so he was buried, or at least laid
there
in the center. Now, of course, if his bones had been there, they're long gone. I've actually been in the middle of the center, but I will tell you, I definitely believe that it is a portal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that people are, and we know that people are continuing to try to
open it
or call things through it, because somebody had done a ritual the night before we'd been there.
And we'd kind of seen things.
And we did kind of see some things, so we know. We know.
So what other things do we have besides the giants and Bigfoot that people see that we go, is it really folklore, or is there something more to it?
Well, werewolves is another really popular one, and Hollywood has had a field day with werewolves. But this was fascinating to me. The earliest surviving example of a man-to-wolf transformation was found in the Epic of Gilgamesh from 2100 BC. That's a long time ago.
The Epic of Gilgamesh talks about the giants. It talks about all of this stuff that we look at today and think, it's just made up. Not so much.
It doesn't last that long, and people don't continue to see it all over. Well, especially, to me, the thing that gives credibility to so much of this is when you have civilizations around the world that were not connected to each other. They didn't have the connection, the technology, the ability to communicate with each other, and they're changing it into stone, and they're drawing pictures that are almost identical. They both saw the same thing. That. There's just no way around that.
The ziggurats, the temples that are the same in Peru and the same in places in North America, they're the same in Asia and the same, all over the world, in Africa. And the ones that have stegosauruses etched into them that they worshipped, hello? Way after the flood, and yet different dinosaurs. A lot of reptilian gods that they were worshiping.
Very similar.
Half human, half reptilian.
Right. Which again, that is fallen realm.
Mm-hmm.
So in ancient Greek and Roman literature, men were transformed into wolves because of bad or immoral behavior, especially eating human flesh. That's pretty bad. And it was interesting because in some of the stories then, Zeus punished them by transforming them into a wolf out of anger, because they actually would try to trick him by, when they sacrificed, they mixed in flesh that was already dead or did some things and tried to get him to eat it.
It is interesting when you think about the other religions and their how they work, all those gods, but there probably is something more to that, transforming men into wolves. You may say, well, that just sounds like mythology. Yeah, but there's a certain king that was transformed into an animal, and that was King Nebuchadnezzar, when he had exalted himself over God and said that he had done all this and he was God himself, basically. And it was at that point that he was turned into an animal and roamed out for 7 years before he came to his senses and then repented. Imagine that.
Yeah. After 7 years as an animal wandering, I think I'd probably repent too. Well, if you're still with us, thank you for sticking around, because I know some of this just seems really far out there.
Well, it's sensationalism at its best. And you can't turn on the TV. You cannot turn on YouTube. You cannot turn on anything that they're not talking about these fringe things. The things that are close to the veil, and I say that because with every single one of them, there has been recorded stuff throughout all of history, and yet we do not have physical, hard, tangible evidence. However, I would argue that even if we did, a lot of it gets snatched up.
Right.
And why would our government want to take away all those skeleton bones? And anytime there's pictures, anytime there's anything that prove that giants did exist. You know, Adolf Hitler was really working. He was trying to make the Aryan race. Well, if you really look it up, the Aryan race was basically the Nephilim again.
Right.
He was trying to bring an angelic DNA and recreate all this. And he was doing experiments with also animals,
Right.
and with people. And I would argue that that's why God really worked things so that way he was stopped when he did. Unfortunately, though, I would even argue that
His research
most all those scientists and everybody ended up coming over to America, and it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't put into Area 51.
Well, and here's the thing. They take all of these things because Satan, from the beginning, what is his biggest deception is to make people believe he doesn't exist. And so then if Satan and evil don't exist and demons don't exist, then giants can't exist.
And neither can any of these other wild things.
Right. And it's really hard to win a battle that you don't know you're fighting.
Well, and I would argue this stuff is still going on because there are people over by Area 51 who things have escaped. And we are talking cross-animal things that are not anything that we know.
Right.
And they are doing things with the DNA. They're even with making our super soldiers with multiple different bear DNA for strength, cheetah DNA for speed, bat DNA for hearing, you know, and night for vision, and just all this stuff to make a super soldier. These are the things that you go watch and you pay at the movies to watch some supposedly fictional film, but is it really?
Right. I think there's a shred of truth in so much of what Hollywood puts out there, because then when we hear about it on the news, everybody goes,
that's just fiction.
Right, I saw that in a movie, you know?
Saw that in a movie 25 years ago or 20 years ago.
Right. And so then it makes it easier to continue to have the wool pulled over our eyes.
This is going to be kind of an intense series because we are going to get into the alien delusion, the biggest
Deception that's coming.
And how that does relate to the Bible, how that does relate to Jesus and the impending rapture, and how it relates to the Antichrist.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
The son of perdition.
It makes you wonder, are these things real? And are they moving maybe between dimensions, which is something else that we'll cover and we'll talk about. You know, but how do they appear and disappear so frequently, all of them? And how have they been in so many places around the world?
Well, that's what I'm excited about is some of these episodes. We're going to get into the actual stargates, as we broached on a little bit before, that do exist all over the earth. And the hieroglyphics that go so far back on so many nationalities and cultures and religions and portals, time.
I mean, they were carving things like that into stone,
which actually works as like a black hole,
like a wormhole.
So we are going to look into that later, and now you're kind of getting into my cup of tea. and is that biblical? And I will argue yes, and we will bring some of the scriptures to light of how all this kind of comes together, and God is revealing all this. It's been in front of us, but he's really making it known now to keep us from being deceived, because in Revelation it said there will be a time when even the elect will be deceived. And our goal is to make you informed about the truth, about the possibilities, and what the Bible has to say about it. Now, whether what you choose to do with it is up to you.
But you can't say, we didn't tell you.
So until next time.
Shalom.